Couple things for homework. Getting started unit, please complete that. I know there was an issue with the one question, I don't know why, but I will make sure for the one question there's an issue with that you get credit either way, whatever you answer. The other thing is that on Canvas, at the top of every unit, if you go to modules in Canvas, the thing that's at the top is the unit objective study guide. That is your study guide for the class. So I know a lot of times we get past the first exam and students say, I wish we had a study guide. And I'm like, you have one. It's always been there. So the study guide objectives, they tell you exactly what you need to study for the exam. They're exactly what I base lecture on, what I base lab on, what I base all assignments on. That's what the exams are about. So what I would suggest is download these, start answering them. If it says, what is ecology? You can type it out, you can write it out, you can talk them into a file if you want to re-listen to it, put them on note cards, whatever's best for you as a learner, that's your study guide. What I suggest for success in this class is to, as soon as we're done with lecture, the next 2 days in between class, write out the objectives that we covered in class that day. You have them done. Then, next lecture, again, write them out, write the new ones out, go back, review the old ones, review the new ones, and then keep going back and reviewing. The best thing that you're going to be able to do, take those objectives, give them to somebody else, and say, quiz me, pick random ones and ask me. So that you can have somebody just kind of look through and say, explain the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And then you explain it to them. If you can go through those objectives and you can answer all of them, you know what you know. Quizzing is really important. It's the highest level of studying. It's one of the things with people who say, I'm a bad test taker. You are not a bad test taker, you are bad at studying. When you review, study, and quiz, review, study, and quiz, review, study, and quiz, and when you quiz and you can go through those objectives randomly and you can explain all of them, you walk into the exam day and you're like, I got this. You're confident. Guess what else happens when you have done this over and over again when you're confident? Is you don't make stupid mistakes on the exam. You know how when you take an exam and you misread something? That's because you're nervous, because you haven't done this enough. Being a good test taker is being a good studier. So whenever students say to me, I'm a bad test taker, I say, no, you're not. You're bad at studying. Let's get to the bottom of how you study. And usually it's, oh yeah, I have my phone out. I text, I listen to music. You need to sit just like you do for an exam, at a proper desk, in a chair, with just the materials for this class, and everything else goes away, and it is silent. Train for exams. That will make you a good test taker. Most of you will take boards or some kind of test that gets you into grad school or this school or that school. Guess what? Quiet, at a proper desk, in a proper chair. The more that you can train yourself to get used to those situations, the easier they become and the better you become in those situations. So do yourself a favor and stop lying to yourself and saying, I'm a bad test taker, I need music, I need this, I need that during studying, because you don't need it, you won't die. When I grade things, turn everything off. I'm focused 100% in it. You have to learn how to do it. Okay, so bits of advice. I am not going to go through the syllabus. The syllabus is online. I see a lot of you have taken the syllabus quiz already. That's going through the syllabus. You know the rules of the class. If you have any questions, always ask me. Ask me in person, send me a Canvas message, send me an email. I'm happy to answer any and all questions, please. That's what I'm here. I want you guys to be successful in this class, and I want you to be successful in getting ready for your career paths. So 2 of my jobs in this class are to teach you the content and get you ready for the next step. Because your next steps just get harder and harder and harder. And you make them harder depending on how you prepare yourself. So I'm going to give you all the tips that you need. I will be your biggest cheerleader, but you also have to put in the work, okay? All right, so let's talk about population ecology. Let's get to it. Population ecology in your free textbook, or if you get the hard copy, it will cover sections 44.1, 44.2, and 45, chapter 45. So we do not go through all of chapter 44 in the book. So I do this to kind of help you hone in. The objectives also help you hone in on exactly what you need to study. So you don't have to read all of chapter 44. That's wasting your time. I want you to be efficient at your time. So look in these sections for population ecology, and you'll look at the objectives, and you'll write them out. Any questions about objectives, you can always ask me. And
is this in the lab book or the free textbook?
This is in the textbook or the e-textbook. So the textbook, you can buy a hard copy, or it's the e-textbook, not the lab book. Yeah. The objectives are not in your lab book. They are on Canvas, first thing in every module. Okay? Good question. Okay, so ecology. We're going to start this unit with ecology. Ecology is like big picture biology. We're talking like the world around us. We're going to get from very specifics of ecology. We're going to talk about populations today, next class communities, and then we're going to get into ecosystems and the biosphere, the world. So we're going to get into these. We're going to kind of like in this class, we're going to go from this to more specific individual things in biology. So the definition of ecology, you can see here, it's the study of the relationships between living things and their environment. So we're going to take a look at how do things like what's in the soil affect producers like trees, which affect things that eat producers, or things that eat the things that eat producers. Carbon dioxide, how does that fit in? Oxygen, how does that fit in? Water, how does that fit in? So all of these things, we're going to take a look at the relationship between them through this unit. So let's go back one step. The term biology, what does it mean? So when we take a look at this word biology, one of the nice things about biology is often that you can break down the words into smaller pieces and get a little bit of an idea of what do they mean. B-I-O means living. O-L-O-G-Y means the study of. So biology means the study of living things. So we're going to take a look at two BIO issues in the ecology unit. We're going to look at abiotic factors. Again, we're going to break this word up a little bit. A means non or no. Bio means living. So if something is abiotic, it means it is non-living. Things like, if we're looking at this picture here, the water, the rocks, the air, those are all abiotic. Would you say that abiotic factors are critically important to living things? Yeah, for sure, right? Air. We cannot live without oxygen. Water. Our body is made up of 70 to 90% water, depending on what cell we're looking at. We need water for the chemical reactions in our cells. So just those two things there, critically important. So just because something is abiotic does not mean it is not important. And then we're going to look at the relationship between abiotic factors and biotic factors. So again, there's that BIO, living things. And that's what we're going to focus on in this unit. Kind of just like another definition of ecology. Today we're going to focus on population ecology. We're going to look at some of the basics of population ecology today. So how do populations grow? What limits or regulates the growth of a population? How are populations distributed? And what about the human population? There's a lot going on with the human population these days. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. All right, so basics of population ecology. Let's talk about population growth. Population growth, let's step back and say, what is a population? A population are members of the same species who live in the same place at the same time. Are we a population? Yeah, right? We're the same species, we live in the same place, we live in the same time. This is a really key thing. We'll get into more of this when we talk evolution next. But the potential to interbreed means that anybody in this group who are the same species can mate and have offspring who survive. Not just the offspring survive, but their offspring can make, so they can also make offspring. So we make offspring, our offspring can make offspring, can keep our group going. So this is a really important thing in terms of populations, and we'll get into evolution, survival. Populations' ability to interbreed is key to allowing us to move forward into the future. So kind of important points. We're the same species. Because we can interbreed, we can have offspring who can successfully also breed, and we live in the same place at the same time. These factors influence how many in the population are born, how many die, and how many come and go. Migration, I know we use that a lot in terms of humans, but it's really a biology term. Migration means either coming into the group or leaving the group. The most significant factors here are births and deaths. This usually, in a natural population, doesn't have a huge influence, who comes and goes. But usually these two are the most influential. All right, so let's just address migration real quick. If we have immigration, in means joining. You are joining the population or you're moving into the population. So somebody's coming in, groups are coming in, but they have to, again, when we're talking populations, be the same species. We can interbreed with them. Emigration is the opposite. It means that we have individuals who are leaving the group. They're leaving the population. In the human population, this can be significant, but when we're talking about natural populations like the squirrels out there, the butterflies, the birds, these are not very significant most times. Populations have stability when the births and the immigrants, those that are joining the population, equal the deaths and the emigrants. Then you have a stable population. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of calculations, and especially in lab today, we're going to do some calculating. So we're going to take a look at what has or how do numbers and if individuals coming and going influence the population size. Again, most significant factors, births and deaths. Populations get larger. So these are kind of obvious facts, right? They get larger when you have more births and more immigrants. Then you have deaths and emigrants. So we're adding to our population. And the opposite is true, right? Populations get smaller. If we have more deaths and emigrants, then we have births and immigrants. So how do we calculate this? Really simple. We're just going to put all of these factors into a calculation. We're going to group the births and the immigrants, the deaths and the emigrants. We're going to subtract one from the other. So that our annual growth rate of a population are the births minus the deaths. We're going to group these together because, again, they are the most significant factor in the growth of a population. The immigrants minus the emigrants, we're going to group them together. When we add these factors together, it tells us the change in our population size. a lot of times if you read studies on population growth, they may not even acknowledge the immigrants and the emigrants. Like today in lab, we're just going to focus on birth and death. All right, so let's talk about natural population increases. Birth and death rate, generally the most significant influences, right? How many, and this is kind of an interesting thing in terms of nature. And when we get into evolution, natural selection, nature selects for those individuals that are best suited to living in that environment. If you are comfortable living in your environment, meaning that you've got a good house, you've got a lot of food, you've got a lot of access to your abiotic factors, you're like, cool, I'm comfortable. Guess what you have time for? Reproduction. So that when natural selection favors individuals in a population, probably means they have the best traits in the population, and they're going to start pumping out offspring. If you are not comfortable, if natural selection does not favor the characteristics that you have in your environment, you are just scrapping by to survive. So if you have a day where you are running late for school, okay, so you wake up late, you get here, go to school, you're like, oh, I gotta go right to work. You go to work, you made no time or you had no time to get food all day. When you get home at, let's say, 11 o'clock at night, and you have not eaten all day, and you have not taken a break all day, what's the first thing on your mind usually? Food, yeah, not sex. And if you say, yeah, it's sex, you're lying. You are hungry. The first thing you want to do is feed yourself, right? When you're starving, first thing you want to do is survive, food. So when you are not comfortable, when you have individuals in a population who are not selected for, they do not have good characteristics, they will die off. They do not have time to pass on the good traits to their offspring. They can't even make offspring, right? They want to eat. They want to get a good home. They want to get water and air. So those individuals who are not selected for are dying off. The ones that are comfortable giving birth. This all ties into evolution, that usually when we see a population going up, the environment favors a lot of individuals in that population. So things are good when a population goes up. All right, so we talked a little bit about this already. What influences births and deaths? So one thing is biotic potential. There's that BIO again. The potential of the biology in that population. Anything that is biologically related, mostly you, right? Your biology, you're a living thing. So you're doing good in the population. Other things that are good, you probably don't have a lot of predators. You probably have a lot of food. Your food is biology related, right? Your food is living things. So all the things around you that are living are good to you. You reproduce because you're comfortable, your population goes up. You have biotic, living thing potential. So one of the things, I love about biology is that you can look at the vocab and get something out of it. So stop and think. The other thing is that you might have other issues that are non-biology related, and that's the environment. And so here we're talking not necessarily all, but mostly abiotic factors, your environment. What if your population's growing, and then you run out of space? Okay, that's environmental resistance. The environment kicks in and it says, no more space, slow down. What if you start running out of food? You have too many individuals in your population, you can't feed everybody. Population slows down. Predators start to go up, they start eating your population. Too many in the population, often you get parasites, like the coronavirus. Or natural events happen, hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, droughts. All of these things are counter to these things up here. At some point, this has got to stop because this stuff kicks in and it starts to resist the biotic potential. It stands in the way. It says, only so much of all of these things, or too much of these things. First, we're going to focus on biotic potential, and then we'll get back to environmental resistance. And we're going to talk a lot more environmental resistance in the next chapter when we talk about community ecology. Okay, so again, biotic potential, generally we ignore migration. It's usually not important in natural populations. Population size change. We usually look at changes per individual, per some unit time. All right, well, what does that mean? How many babies are you adding every year? If you're a bacteria, how many offspring do you have every minute? So time can be relative to usually the generation time of a population. So if we're talking about mammals like us, our unit of time will usually be like years. If you're talking about a living thing that's really tiny, like a bacteria, if you get strep throat, wake up in the morning and you're like, ooh, kind of scratchy, right? By lunchtime, you're like, oh, I feel awful, you've got the sore throat. The unit of time is probably minutes then. How many of those bacteria are growing in your throat every minute to make you feel worse and worse and worse? So we'll look at some different scenarios with time. All right, so biotic potential. When we're talking about biotic potential, the growth or potential of that population. We are going to say growth rate. We're going to symbolize it as this italicized lowercase r. The way that we can calculate our growth rate, r, is our birth rate minus our death rate. We're going to have to get rate, so we're going to do a percentage calculation. Okay, so for example, if we look at the annual growth rate of a population of mice in an area, let's say we start with our population size of 10,000 individuals in this area. In the first year, we have 500 deaths, but 1,500 births. So things are pretty good. So let's calculate out, you guys got that? Okay. Let's calculate out the growth rate for this population in that first year. Our birth rate, 1,500. We have to get a percentage of what does that mean in regard to the original group size, 10,000. If we take 1,500, we divide by 10,000. We get 0.15 births per mouse per year. If we take this decimal place, we move it 2 places, or we times 0.15 times 100 to get a percentage. We have a 15% birth rate in that year. The death rate, we said we had 500 deaths in that first year, 10,000 individuals in our population. We get 0.05 deaths per mouse per year. Again, we can times this by 100 to get a percentage. 100 times 0.05 gives us 5% death rate per year. We still don't have R yet, though. We're going to calculate R. Okay, so let's go back to our calculation here. Our growth rate R is the birth rate minus the death rate. Okay, so you guys, give a second. What is our population increase in the first year? Good, yeah, 10%, you got it. So birth rate increase is 10% in that year. We take 0.15, our birth rate, minus 0.05, our death rate, and we get 0.10, or 10% population increase per mouse per year. So if things are good, we can have a very rapid biotic potential, meaning that our rate of growth in a population can go really, really fast. The population size is N, so our 10,000 individuals that we talked about with the mice, that was N. We do a capital N italicized. The population growth is R, the growth rate, times N, the size of the population. So using that initial growth rate, we can calculate what we project the population to do over time. Eventually you'll recalculate it, but just for kind of basics. If we know R and we know N, what is Rn for the first year? How many individuals did we add? Yeah, good. So we added 1,000. We calculate that out, Rn, 0.10 was our growth rate, 10,000 individuals was our N, R times N, 10,000 individuals in the population to start with, times our growth rate. That gave us 1,000 individuals in that first year. Is that a lot? Yeah. So now we can add this to this, use our original R, and come up with Rn for the second year. So what is Rn for year 2 now? Remember that your N has changed. The R will stay the same. So what's Rn for the second year? 1,100. Good, 1,100. So second year we've already added an extra 1,100. We added 1,000 to that first year. So second year our population size became 11,000 times our original Rn, which was 10%. 10% times 11,000 gave us 1,100 more individuals. So in 2 years, we've added 2,100 extra individuals. Is that going to keep going up? Yeah. So we're going to get a really good biotic potential out of this group as long as environmental resistance is kind of doing good, right? We got enough space, we got enough food, our predators are down, nobody's getting sick, all those things. So what happens is rapid exponential growth. So this can lead to exponential growth, means your population is like da-da-da-da-da. It's accelerating really, really quickly. If we graph that, it does this. It goes and then it goes all the way up like that. So the shape mimics a J, and we call that a J-shaped curve. So bacteria, this is like my example of getting strep throat. This is what bacteria do in your throat when you get sick. This is what the coronavirus does when someone breathes it at you, is that the population is like this, and then in a matter of hours, it's like that. So here we can see, depends on the population time, that in about 3.5 hours you get about 1,500 bacteria if there's no deaths whatsoever. So they're doing good, they've got enough of the environmental resistance, meaning food, space, water, air, no predators, nothing in their way, no deaths, they go up in 3 hours. If you have about 10% death rate, the blue, your infection gets that exponential growth rate in about 4 hours. If you have a quarter or 25% death rate, it takes a little bit longer, about 6 hours before, 5 to 6 hours before you start to get that taking off. So that might, those environmental resistance factors can elongate this, your exponential growth. A little bit longer if we're talking about not hours, but something like a bird, where it might take years to start seeing that. What is probably more influential than death rate is the rate at reproduction or first reproduction. So depending on the species of eagle, if you have a species of eagle that they start to be able to reproduce at 4 years old, you can see that by about year 20, you start to get that shooting up. However, if their first age of reproduction is 6 years old, you might not get that shooting up until about 25 years. So it's a big 5-year difference between them. Review, what's R? Good, good, growth rate, excellent. All right, so don't forget, growth rate was the birth rate minus the death rate. And again, to get the rate, we get a percentage of births from the population or deaths from the population. So let's go back to that exponential growth, that J-shaped curve. J-shaped curve occurs when you have a lot of births and very little deaths. So birth far exceeds death. And again, environmental resistance way down. It means that that population is living large. Things are going well. They are happy in their environment. Just say comfortable in their environment. They're probably having a lot of offspring because they're comfortable. So biotic potential depends on age of first reproduction. So let's say that I started reproducing and having kids at the age of 9. Do I have the potential to add many humans to the population? Yeah, right? What if every year I had a baby? How frequently I keep adding. So if I'm 9 and I keep adding every year, I've got at least 30, 40 years to keep adding on, right? But I am prone to having triplets. So starting at the age of 9, every year I have 3 offspring for 30, 40 years. And they all do really, really well. They all survive. So potentially I could have 90, 100, 120 kids, right, in my lifetime. That's pretty good, right? Now let's say I don't reproduce until I'm 40. I have 1, I don't do it again. I don't have more than 1, but that one dies. Right? I'm not adding much then. So we can play with these a little bit to see that these are really important to how fast that J-shaped curve takes off. It could go, or it could be like way down here and go up, depending on all of this. All right, so let's look at a few different factors that might influence when our growth rate happens in a population. So typically what we do find in natural populations are what are called a boom and bust cycle, growth and crash. We see that a lot here in our area of the world where we have 4 seasons. The winter season really hurts a lot of populations, natural populations for us. So that April, May, June, April flowers bring May showers, if you've ever heard that right. Temperature gets really nice around here. Water is more available in liquid form. More sunshine. More hours in our day. All of those things make for a really good situation for plants to grow. When plants start growing exponentially, there's a lot of food for others. So when you have a lot of food, you do well. And so we see a lot of populations follow what the plants do. And then come September, days are getting shorter again. Temperatures are getting colder. It's not raining as much. So there's not as much food available. Then it gets really cold. Water gets locked up in the form of ice, snow. We don't have much. Everything kind of levels off. It's just trying to survive over the winter. Waiting for that good situation. And then it goes up again. So typically what we see in populations that live where there are seasons, we see this boom and the bust, growth and crash, survival, and hopefully it happens like that every year. Sometimes it can take years for this to happen in a population. So here we have some reindeer. A population of reindeer was studied from about 1910. They started to experience a good situation in their area. Something happened in about 1925. They went down, they start to go up again. Things are really good from about 1925 to 1935. That population does really well. But then environmental resistance kicks in and they start to go down. And then they're crashing. It's really bad. It starts to get really, really, really bad. And then it got really bad in the 1950s. And we see almost extinction here. So depending on, so this I would call right here, the peak, I would call that environmental resistance is like, hey, I'm here. Right? Environmental resistance, wherever you see that first peak, the environmental resistance is like, I'm gonna be here. So, depends on what's happening. So let's take a look at the red. So with the red, we've got that J-shaped curve. If you just look at up to the point, it's a J shape. You've got exponential growth, environmental resistance kicks in, something really bad happens, and that population, they die totally out. They're extremely damaged. All right, let's look at blue. So blue again, up to the point, J-shaped curve. Something bad happens, but instead of dying out, they rebound at a really low rate. And then they start to come back. We see some biotic potential. Just because it's not sharp like this, doesn't mean it's not biotic potential when you have it going up. Areas of moving up are biotic potential. Areas of moving down are that the bust or the crash. So we have that bust, crash, biotic potential, bust, crash. All right, so it goes a little bit lower. We're going to talk a little bit about carrying capacity in just a second. So they go at a lower carrying capacity over time. Green, they go up. Environmental resistance kicks in. Not too much damage to the population. They start to go down a little bit. They rebound a little bit. They go down, they rebound, they go down. On average over time, what you see is the population exists at an average size. It does go up and down over time, but on average, it's about here. That's what we call the carrying capacity. The carrying capacity is the maximum number in the population the environment can support for a long period of time. I'm going to go through like 2 more points and then we'll take a break. Carrying capacity again. It is affected by environmental resistance. How much space you have, how much food you have, which is dependent on light and water, nutrients, predators, prey, parasites, all that environmental resistance will determine your carrying capacity over time. Okay, so exponential growth, usually when a population has a lot of exponential growth, they're showing that J-shaped curve, they have little environmental resistance. So things are good. Everything's available. Nothing's resisting their growth. So again, environmental resistance will counteract biotic potential. It's going to stand in the way of your potential of your living things, your bio, to grow.